When we have conflict with people who deeply matter to us and it doesn't get resolved, or when there are relationships with people who deeply matter to us and they go sideways and we can't figure out how to make them right, that can be one of the most painful and confusing experiences in our life, and we can often be left feeling stuck. How do I move forward while this thing just feels so bad? Well, when you're experiencing that, there may be one of three different things going on, and fortunately there is one relationship principle that if you learn it and apply it to either of these three situations, it will help clear up the fog and the confusion that you feel and help you know how to move forward to stay strong and healthy and building great relationships. Hi everybody, I'm Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And when relationships are off and they're not getting right, it's important to know which of three different things are happening so that you can clear up the fog and confusion and know what steps to take to move forward in life. The first thing that might be happening is you might be getting bumped. In our last video on why we really fight with the people we loved, we talked about getting bumped. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back and watch that, and that will be helpful to you. The second thing is there may be real conflict in the relationship that needs to be resolved. And the third thing is you may have experienced trauma or ongoing trauma in the relationship. And these three things are different circumstances, but there is one relationship principle which, if you learn it and apply it, will help you see your way through each of these three different situations. And in this video, we're going to apply this principle to situations where we have gotten bumped and situations where we have conflict. And then in our next video, we're going to apply this principle to situations where we've been traumatized. And that principle is this: you are responsible for your behavior. You're not responsible for other people's response or reaction to your behavior. So if you have done something wrong, it is important to take responsibility for it, because you're responsible for your behavior. But if you haven't done something wrong, there is nothing for you to take responsibility for, even if the other person is upset by your behavior for some reason. Now, the corollary to this is that other people are responsible for their behavior, but they are not responsible for your reaction or your response to their behavior. So if there is something that they have done wrong, they need to take responsibility for that. But if they haven't done anything wrong, there's nothing for them to take responsibility for, even if you are somehow troubled or upset by their behavior. And this one principle will help you move forward in each of these three situations when you apply it. And just as importantly, it will help you stay out of the victim role in the triangle, because it's very easy when you have unresolved conflict or things have gone sideways in a relationship to kind of drift down into the victim role and believe that this person is your villain and that you're stuck and you cannot move forward until they change. And so if you apply this principle, it will keep you from drifting into the triangle and keep you up on the stairway where you can remain strong and powerful and keep moving forward and creating a healthy life for yourself. So what I want to do is look at each of these three situations: getting bumped, having conflict, and being traumatized. And what I want to do is just do a quick thumbnail sketch of what it looks like when those situations resolve well. And that will help us understand what has gone wrong and how to resolve it by using this relationship principle that you are responsible for your behavior and not for other people's response to your behavior. Now, a simplified thumbnail sketch of what happens when things go well, when we're getting bumped, is the first thing we learn to do is recognize our cycles. There are 3 different kinds of cycles that we get in when we get bumped that can make the situation even worse and make it very painful, but we learn to recognize when we're in a cycle. The second thing is we each own our own wounding. I realize that I'm bringing some baggage into the relationship. I'm not completely whole, so I own my own wounding. The third thing that we learn to do is we learn to stay attached even when our wounding pops up, and then out of that, we create some healing. That's just a very simplified thumbnail sketch of what happens when it goes well. And by the way, I mentioned 2 resources in that last video. I'll mention them here again in case this really kind of hits a nerve for you and you want to explore this. The first is a book called Created for Connection, and the second is a retreat called Choreography of Connection, which I think for couples is absolutely the best resource you can utilize to improve your relationship. I highly recommend it. I will put links to both of those resources in the description of this video. But essentially, that's what happens when things go well. Now, when this doesn't go well is when I violate this principle that I'm responsible for my behavior, not for other people's reaction or response to it. And other people are responsible for their behavior, not my reaction or response to it. And so even though they did something innocent and something no one will say, well, that's a horrible thing to do, right? They may have said, I'm tired. Did you take the trash out yet? When are you going to do the dishes? Something very simple, nothing inappropriate or immoral, but it surfaces my wounding, and I want to hold them responsible for the fact that I feel so bad. I want to make it their fault. And we get in these relationships where the idea is your job is not to do anything that surfaces the fact that I have some wounding inside of me, which is absolutely impossible to do, and it creates very exhausting relationships. Now, let me say that even when you're doing this well, when you get bumped and you identify your cycles, own your own wounding, right, stay attached, create some healing, even when you're doing this well, this still takes time. It's not something where you have one conversation, figure things out, and it's never a problem again. It takes time to figure out even, these are our cycles. And then it takes time to recognize when you're in a cycle and stop yourself and say, hey, time out, we're in one of our cycles again. We're on a downward spiral, right? It takes time to learn how to do that and own your own wounding instead of blame the other person immediately. So it does take time, but the good news is if you know the steps to take here, it does get better. And pretty soon, instead of getting bumped every other day, you're getting bumped once a week, and then you're getting bumped once a month and once a quarter. And then pretty soon when you get bumped, you recognize it right away and it's not a big deal. So healing does happen, but this is a process that takes time, and that's okay as long as you know what's happening and you know the steps to take so you don't feel crazy and you know you're moving forward in your relationship. The second thing that might be happening when relationships go sideways is you may be in actual conflict where someone is doing something that is impacting the relationship negatively, and that needs to be addressed. And so kind of a thumbnail sketch of what happens when that goes well is the first step is that you do a say-so principle with them. Now, 2 videos ago, we outlined the say-so principle. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you go back and view that because it is a very helpful way to do conflict. It's a very helpful way to ask someone to change their behavior to help improve the relationship. So that's your job, is to talk about the conflict and ask the person to change. Then on the other side of the relationship, really what you're looking for is consideration, right? You just want someone considerate who understands their behavior can impact things negatively, and they're willing to take responsibility if their behavior is wrong. And then the third step of that going well is something you do together, and it's just negotiation, right? You've asked for something in the say-so principle, and quite often what will happen is the person will just say, yeah, I can do that, right? Every once in a while, there's some negotiation that happens there because you don't get everything you want, and they may not be able to give you everything they want. So they may say something like, well, I can do this, but I can't do that, right? I can do this part, I can't do that part. I can do this instead. Would that be helpful to you, right? So that act of negotiation lets you know that they care when their behavior is wrong and that it's impacting you in some way. The other part of the negotiation may be something, yes, I can do this, but honestly, I think part of this problem is yours, and here's where I would like for you to change, right? And so then you have consideration. And that's the kind of negotiation that happens when conflict goes well. Now, where conflict doesn't go well is when, instead of taking responsibility for things that they've done wrong, instead of saying, yeah, you're right, I lied to you, I cheated, I stole, I gossiped, whatever it is, instead of admitting and taking responsibility for their behavior, they will want to take a step down and treat the situation as though you've gotten bumped, right? And so the fact that you're calling them out on this behavior is evidence of some sort of weakness and wounding or character issue in you. And they may say things like, why do you have to be so rigid? Why are you such a perfectionist? Why are you attacking me? Can't you take a joke? I was just joking. Wow, don't you trust me? Do you have a problem with trust or something? Or they'll attack the way the message was delivered and say something like, man, how long have you felt this way? I wish you would have said this 6 months ago. Anything to move the focus off of their behavior that they need to take responsibility for and put it on your response to their behavior. And so they're violating this principle that in relationships that are healthy, we each take responsibility for our behavior and not the other person's response to our behavior. And so if you're in a situation like that where you have a real conflict with someone's behavior and they want to act as though you're getting bumped and that there's some sort of wounding that's causing you to call them out, then you want to try to just redirect the conversation back to their behavior. You may want to say something like, hey, whether or not all this is true, what you're saying about me, it has nothing to do with your behavior. And then re-describe the behavior as you did in the say-so principle and say, you know, you still didn't honor an agreement, or you broke a promise, or you lied to me, right? And what I need is for you to recognize that behavior is inappropriate and I need for you to change that behavior. Is that something you can do? Now, if you're in a relationship where someone will not take responsibility for their behavior and instead always wants to relocate the problem into your response to their behavior, even though their behavior is clearly wrong, when you're in that kind of a relationship, there is really nothing you can do to resolve that problem and make that relationship strong and healthy. Remember the principle of reciprocity that we keep coming back to. Your job in loving others well is to take responsibility for your behavior. It is not to make sure that other people take responsibility for their behavior. Your job is to take responsibility for your behavior and then pay attention to who else you're in a relationship takes responsibility for their behavior. And those are people you can trust. And those are people that you can move forward in relationship. And so in order to stay out of the triangle, because if you stay in relationship with someone who will not take responsibility for the behavior, you will remain the victim and they will remain your villain. But in order to move up to the stairway where you can keep moving forward and developing a healthy, strong, powerful life that you want to live, is simply to minimize the relationships with the people you can't trust to take responsibility for the behavior, or eliminate those relationships altogether. In our next video, we will look at situations where we have been traumatized, and we'll look at what does that process looks like when it resolves well and can even result in reconciliation. and what happens to derail that process. But for now, practice asking yourself this simple question when relationships go sideways and it just feels wrong and they're not getting right. Practice asking yourself this simple question: am I getting bumped, or is this conflict? Right? Have they done nothing wrong and I have some wounding popping up and I need to take ownership? Or is there a real problem with their behavior that needs to be addressed and they need to take responsibility for? And that will help you understand which process to go through to move the relationship forward. Simple steps: practice, practice, practice. That's what Heart Tools is all about.